Hi everybody and welcome to today's video. So before we get started with the content of this video, remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more of these. And also if you have any questions about the content of the video or any other questions related to the maths that you're studying, please leave a comment down below. Today's video is going to be about finding the gradient of a line through 2 points on a graph. Now, in order to do this, we're going to first start with some basic principles. Of course, if you already understand these, please feel free to skip over. The timestamp will be in the comments down below. Every point on a coordinate grid is represented by two numbers, and we normally write them with brackets around them like this. So it goes the first number, comma, then the second number. Now these numbers represent where the point is in the x and the y direction. Going in the horizontal direction, or the flat line, is the x-axis, and the vertical line in the y direction with the arrow is the y-axis. We call the point where the two join O, or the origin, and this point has the coordinates 0, 0. Our first number here gives us the distance from the origin in the x direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the second number gives us the distance from the origin in the y direction. You can see here 1, 2, and 3. So this is the coordinate of a point, and these coordinates, of course, can have positive or negative numbers. Above the x-axis, we have our positive y numbers. Below the x-axis, we have our negative y numbers. Okay, and we have our positive numbers in the x direction and the negative numbers in the x direction. So these are my axes. Okay, so now we've completed the basic principles. Let's move on to understanding what is the gradient of a straight line and how we would find it when we have 2 points on a graph. So here on this set of axes, I have 3 different straight lines, each with different gradients. There are 2 important things to understand about the gradient before we start calculating it. The first thing is it describes how steep a slope is. We can see that this line here has the steepest upward slope, whereas this line here is going up slightly shallower. This third line has a negative gradient. We denote it negative because it's going downwards from left to right, whereas the first 2 lines are going upwards from left to right. We say they have a positive gradient. The size of the gradient is how steep the line is. So our first slope going upwards with the steep gradient would have a larger number than the second line, which is going up at a shallower rate. In maths, we normally use the letter m to denote the gradient. Now, there are many ways to interpret what the meaning of gradient is in terms of maths, so I'll do my best to cover a few of the most common ways of describing it. One of the ways of understanding gradient is that it is the change in the y direction of a line divided by the change in the x direction of a line. Some other people will call this rise over run. Let's take a look at this line segment here. The first point has coordinates 1, 2. The second point coordinates 3, 6. I'm going to pick a starting point and a finishing point. First, let's work out the change in the y direction. I'll start with the final y coordinate and subtract away the initial y coordinate to work out the change is of plus 4. Then we're going to divide by the change in the x direction. The final x coordinate was 3. The initial one was 1. If we work this out, we find that the gradient is 2. That means for every 1 we go across in the x direction, we will rise by 2. Now, if we erase the actual coordinates that I just used and replace it with x1, y1, and x2, y2, we're going to get a general formula for working out the gradient. So let's do exactly as before. The second y coordinate subtracting the first y coordinate. We'll then do the same thing with the second x coordinate and subtract away the initial x coordinate. This will work out the gradient of a straight line. Let's take a look at this example question here. We have two blue dots, two blue coordinates on my coordinate grid, and I'm going to work out the gradient of this line using those 2 points. The first thing that I'm going to do is write down the coordinates of each point. The second one will be 6, 1. Now we work this out, just like before, using the formula that I described. I'm going to choose a first point and a second point. So the point on my left will be my x1, y1, and the point on the right will be my x2, y2. Now I'm going to do the change in the y direction, so I'm going to do y2 minus y1, which here would be 1 minus 3. Then I'm going to divide by x2 minus x1, which here would be 6 minus 2. If we calculate this fraction, we find it to be minus 2 divided by 4, which works out to be minus a half. So this line has a negative gradient, which we should have seen already because this line is sloping downwards. It's not very steep either, so a fractional gradient means it's a shallow downward slope in this case. Let's look at one more example together. For this straight line, I'm going to pick out 2 points that lie on it. I'm going to write down their coordinates. And then I'm going to follow the same formula that I've previously described. My second point will be 1, 3. So I will do the second y value minus the first y value. Note how I'm putting brackets around negative numbers when I'm subtracting. Now I'm going to do 1 minus minus 1. I do recommend that you always put brackets around negative numbers when you're using them in expressions. So we'll work out that this is in fact 4 divided by 2. So the gradient of this line is 2. We can see this on the graph because every 1 I go across, I go up by 2. Every 1 I go across, I go up by 2. So hopefully that explains how to find the gradient of a line using 2 points.